Hey everybody, it's time for another Basement Breakdown, where we talk about the aesthetics, the writing, the dramatic ideas at work in an episode of television. You might say I like to keep a close eye on things, right? On account of this guy? All right, let's get started. Better Call Saul, Season 6, Episode 2, Carrot and Stick. I didn't get around to Nacho's storyline last time, so let's start there this time, because I want to take a deep look at this first shot we get of Nacho himself in this episode. It's a long camera move that gives us a panorama view of Nacho's stifling motel prison. Now, when I say the word panorama, I imagine what might first come to mind is a big, wide view, right? The kind of vista produced by a panorama lens. The word panorama comes from the Greek pan, meaning everything, and orama is to see, or thereabouts. I'm not a classicist, but that's the general idea as it's come down to us through the ages. In a fixed lens panorama, we feel like we see everything because we have this view that's stretched wide across the horizontal axis. That kind of panorama across the horizon can be produced equally well in still photography and in motion pictures. But motion pictures have a second kind of panorama, one that plays out across, instead of the horizon, the axis of time. By rotating the camera, you can create a seemingly all-encompassing view of a space for the audience, a panoramic view. That's why this camera move is called a pan, because that motion creates a panorama. That's how fundamental it is to the language of cinema. It's fundamental because it's really powerful. When you construct a panorama using time, you gain a huge flexibility of space. That fixed lens horizontal panorama needs a horizon to make visual sense. But you can, and quite often do, shoot a cinematic panorama in a small space. In fact, a long pan can be an effective way to make the surroundings feel small by giving the audience a complete view while showing them very little along the way. And that's the approach we have here. As the camera's pan comes to a stop, slides a little bit to peek around the corner, it feels like, wow, that's it? This is Nacho's entire world right now, and there's nothing to it. The feeling of claustrophobia is accentuated by Michael Mando's performance. Complementary to the motion of the camera in this shot is the motion of the actor back and forth across the frame. I'll speed up the footage so you can see both how simple and how elegant the choreography is. Just track Nacho's position in the frame. He starts on the right side of the frame, drifts to the left, crosses to the right, drifts to the left, crosses to the right, drifts back to the left. This agitation that we see in his smaller motions, fiddling with the light switch, punching that wire grate, also plays out in Nacho's larger movements around the frame. And at the same time, all this agitation is seen within the overall smooth, gentle camera movement that conveys the eerie stillness, the deadness of the setting. It's a symphony of complementary motion in the camera and by the actor that lends a rich atmosphere to the scene from the start. That's why I think this shot is so beautiful. There's actually another layer of genius at work, but I'm going to come back to that. For now, let's deconstruct this fun, suspenseful interlude with Nacho and the dude in the hut across the way. This storyline manages to generate a lot of excitement with very little dialogue and a similarly Spartan visual vocabulary. It's essentially a story told through the manipulation of three elements: air conditioning, slivers of light, light coming through narrow apertures, and dripping water. That is a minimal box of toys, but this is a minimalist sequence. I mean, not only is the audio very quiet in this first scene, sometimes there's barely any video to go with it, right? We experience so much of this scene through these occluded point of view shots that make the viewer uncomfortable. Because like Nacho, we want the whole picture. We want to see what's coming. And like Nacho, we're forced to figure out what's happening through these tiny slivers. Light, vision, these are scarce commodities for Nacho right now, and we are made to feel that scarceness along with him. Then the shot shifts to match his slow realization. Drip, drip, drip. The show loves to turn the most prosaic things into the most pivotal story elements. Here, the dripping water is the thing that shifts the informational advantage to Nacho. It allows him to see beyond his narrow aperture and make a deduction about what lies behind the walls of this little shack here. Namely, if the AC's running, somebody's probably in there. And immediately he sets out to confirm his theory by finding the hole in the other guy's wall, the little sliver of light through which he must be watching Nacho. In the second scene of this two-scene plotline, we're playing with the same toys, air conditioner, slivers of light, and water, in new ways now. That broken air conditioner, for example, that in the first scene was part of Nacho's stifling prison, is now his means of escape. And after he busts that AC unit out, pow! No more slivers for Nacho. They open that camera iris right up, and with a little help from post-production, the picture is practically overwhelmed with light. Nacho's field of view opens up, lets in the light. Now, and only now, do we cut to the perspective of the guy in the hut, monitoring his tiny aperture of light. Because now, as we know, he's the one who doesn't have the whole picture. And the show wants to emphasize that reality by now highlighting the narrowness of his viewpoint. The tables have turned and the shot-making changes accordingly. Now, we're building to the inevitable moment when Nacho gets the jump on this dude. Even though we're still using this same device of the sliver of light, and even though the pictures are superficially similar to shots of Nacho in the motel room, the shots of Mr. Eyeball here play differently because they're so static. Every shot of Nacho looking through the curtains has this nervous, roving motion to it. But these shots of the watcher emphasize how still he is. He's not looking around, probing the landscape like Nacho was. When we see him looking out, he could not be more fixated on one point. At the same time, this statuesque sentry has his weaknesses, as we're reminded when he reaches over for his neckerchief-based personal cooling system. The water dripping off the bandana echoes the drips that came from the AC unit. More to the point, the drips, this moment, they're about this guy's need to be comfortable. He's human. He likes to keep cool. This is the weakness, if you want to call it that did him in. In fact, when he puts the bandana on his neck and bends down, we see the very air conditioner that has already betrayed him, as we know and he doesn't. This wet bandana business is there to play up how screwed this guy is and why he's screwed, because he can't take the heat like Nacho can. The contrast that's drawn is between static, tunnel-visioned Mr. Eyeball here and animated, probing Nacho, who manages to piece together the situation without even the luxury of climate control. And the ridiculously elegant part to me about this whole little story is that these three elements, air conditioning, light slivers, and water, that were recombined and varied to carry the storytelling load of this sequence, are all featured in that first shot. Just look at the beginning, middle, and end of the pan. We begin at the air conditioner, a sliver of light traces Nacho's path across the room, and we end with running water at the sink. And the filmmakers start refining those aesthetic ingredients immediately. The second shot isolates the dripping water from the shower head, and the third shot of the scene builds itself around this huge sliver of light, a stunning statement of it, in fact, in this beautiful portrait of Nacho. But those second and third images and this entire 10-minute mini-movie that comes after them are all variations on the three motifs that were stealthily introduced in that first panorama shot, a shot that, in its own poetic way, really did show us everything. Let's go now to the opening scene of the whole episode, starting with this first image of the red dominoes being toppled by Jo, one of Nacho's erstwhile housemates. After she knocks them over, Jo starts jabbering about, what do you think the record is?
What do you think what the record is?
The episode is opening up here by suggesting the shape of the narrative arc that's about to play out. These red dominoes, in the color language of the show, trace this long arc into a bloody realm, into deep trouble. And since this is Nacho's house, I read this as Nacho's arc, although it has an archetypical quality to it as well. What's the record, Jo asks. What's the longest anybody's ever done this, set up these red dominoes without knocking them over? It's one way of visualizing the life that Nacho has led ever since he decided to switch out Hector Salamanca's heart pills, since before that, maybe. By all rights, he should be dead by now. This is the rule when you mess with the cartel. We all know this. Yet Nacho's still going. How long can that be sustained? How long can he keep setting up these dominoes without making a mistake and knocking them all over? Note that the row of dominoes curves around. Poppy Lou, the actress who plays Jo, makes the most of a short scene here. Great physical comedy as she shimmies over to helplessly watch the dominoes fall. The effect is that the line of dominoes appears to visually cut through her, and Jo reacts accordingly. The motion of this arc curves back on the person who built it. If this is Nacho's arc, no matter how many dominoes he puts down, it ends the same way, boomeranging back on him. Not every reading needs to be subtle. The show opens with dominoes set in motion to suggest it's setting dominoes in motion in this storyline. And it emphasizes how fast that happens. No matter how careful you were along the way, once the dominoes fall, they fall fast. It's a fatalist image. At the same time, the script shades that image of tragic fate by asking, yeah, but how long could you go?
What do you think what the record is? It's got to be like a lot. What do you think it is?
Yeah.
Because by the end of this episode, after Nacho has escaped impossible situations first by wits and subterfuge, and then through pure berserker aggression, it seems like perhaps our hero could go on forever. He seems almost invulnerable. In the dominoes scene, the visual imagery and the dialogue hold these two ideas. It must end badly, and how long could you go in suspense, side by side, as the substance of Nacho's story does the same. I like that as Joe raves about the all-time domino record, they have Amber repeat Joe's key word, record.
What do you think the record is?
The record.
Yeah.
So the audience can still catch the important idea while Poppy Lou remains committed to her frenzied, barely legible performance. Joe's agitated and Amber's quiet, an echo of the duality we see in agitated Nacho and quiet Mr. Eyeball. And for that matter, in Betsy and Craig Kettleman.
So why don't you go crawl back under whatever slime-covered rock you came from?
Look at the titles of the episodes this season. Dualities are an emphasis more than ever. They're a core part of the show's language that have a special prominence in the final season. In this episode, the duality of agitation and quiet stillness comes up a lot. Speaking of dualities, here's a classic one, light and shadow, that defines the composition as Mike offers Joe and Amber a wad of cash backed by threats, i.e. carrot and stick. This shot uses the drapes to create a stark division down the middle of the frame. Hold your hand up and cover up each side and they look like two different pictures. Mike is backlit such that he's a two-dimensional figure of darkness. But Joe and Amber have depth and detail. We can see their contours and their expressions. They're discernibly human, and Mike is not. He's a void of doom. And we understand that's why the women take the carrot. He gives them a choice between hitting the road and taking their chances with the darkness that he and his colleagues embody. And to sustain this feeling of peril, from this shot through to the moment when Joe and Amber leave, Mike and Tyrus are only portrayed on screen as shadows cut out from the light of the composition. Another of the show's favorite ways to create pairs, to showcase parallels and contrasts, is through repeated action. Mike reading off the dimensions for an identical second safe at the start of this sequence implies, and the rest of the action gradually makes clear, that Mike is going through his motions with the expectation that someone else will follow in his footsteps, doing the same thing as him. And so he endeavors to leave no trace. He barely even touches anything. We just see him probing with his flashlight around every visually interesting set of lines and curves the cinematographer could find in this house, and they do a good job. One of the few things Mike touches ever so gently is the giant vroom artwork, which has been a visual touchstone of Nacho's story for a long time, and is featured again here in a gentle little foreshadowing of Nacho's eventual escape from the Motel Ocotillo. The people who follow in Mike's footsteps and repeat his actions are Juan Bolsa's crew, who, with no particular need to hide, take more of a hands-on approach. They are the agitated counterpart to quiet, methodical Mike. Much of the repeated action is implied. We only need this long pan to see the mess left by the cartel thugs and compare it in our heads to the careful path that Mike took through the house to understand the contrast between his focus and their frenzy. One action we actually do see twice is the opening of the safe. Mike's guy drills the safe in a way that feels steady, firm, and precise. We even see him cleaning up after himself for good measure. Bolsa's guy works hot, loud, and messy. The contrast tells us that Mike's gambit will work. The cartel isn't focused enough to see beyond what Mike wants them to see. So when Bolsa finds that bank statement, which might as well be a cartoon picture of Nacho running to the Motel Ocotillo with Peruvian money bags in his hands, of course Bolsa falls for it. He sees not only what Mike wants him to see, but also what Bolsa himself wants to see, evidence that he's found the root of the cartel's troubles. Of course, we know that on that count, he has the wrong number. This shot of Mike examining Nacho and his father's Canadian ID cards jumped out at me because it looks so much like a peculiar, somewhat mysterious shot of Jimmy and Kim's ID cards during the courthouse wedding sequence in Season 5. Here, the meaning of the shot is more straightforward because the cards, and by implication the characters, take different paths. Nacho's picture goes in the bag. He's still in the game. He'll be put back in the safe. But Mike takes Nacho's dad into his own custody because he's not in the game, and Mike intends to keep him that way. Mike is willing to put himself at risk to defend his belief that the father should not pay for the sins of the son. And this stems from Mike's conviction, as we learned in that great first season episode 5-0, that his own son paid the ultimate price for the sins of the father.
Broke my boy.
The game of the underworld may be dirty and irredeemable for those who play it. Mike has no illusions about that, right? But he insists that the game have boundaries, even if he has to enforce those boundaries himself.
No. You're not doing that.
The scene in the trailer pivots around this odd moment when Fring shatters a glass on the floor and then bends down to clean it up with his bare hands, while insisting the others pretend nothing happened, right?
Continue.
Now, Fring is a neatnik on the best of days, but when he has to deal with the potentially chaotic consequences of a big move, his urge to clean becomes neurotic. We saw this play out through the proxy of Lyle in Namaste last season, as Lyle worked his hands raw under orders from Fring to scrub that fryer to an impossibly spotless shine, while Fring waited to hear the outcome of his risky operation to tickle the tail of the DEA and get them on Lalo's scent. Fring hates chaos so much that as soon as he upsets the order of things by making a move, he's overcome with the need to feel that it's cleaned up, put away, everything in its proper place. The broken glass illustrates how much that urge is driving him in this scene. Mike's plan to retrieve Nacho sounds dangerous and unpredictable. Fring's plan to take an innocent and unsuspecting man hostage sounds to him a straightforward and irresistible assertion of power. Now, I bet you've probably cleaned up a broken glass or two before. Do you think that Fring, with his bare hands, managed to pick up every piece? Or is it more likely that there are some shards he missed and he's just ignoring them? There's something pathetic about the way he uses this neatly folded handkerchief to primly dispose of a few tenacious shards clinging to his skin. We're seeing, in practice, Fring's insistent belief that he can clean up any mess, he can control any chaos, with patient execution of a good plan. Mike is telling him otherwise.
Whatever happens next, it's not going to go down the way you think it is.
When he says to Fring, this isn't going to play out the way you planned, it's the last thing Fring wants to hear. Mike's telling him, this is not a situation you can resolve by tightening your fist. That's only going to make the shards cut you more deeply. You have to contend with the chaos you've unleashed because there's a smart, unpredictable guy out there with information that could destroy you. Mike's talking about Nacho, but don't forget Lalo's a loose shard of glass too, as Fring already appears to realize.
Lalo Salamanca lives.
The medicine Mike feeds Fring here is the truth that, to make it out of this crisis, Fring has to admit he doesn't have total control over the course of events, that Nacho has his own agency. Abducting his father would deepen Nacho's fury, and Mike quite reasonably does not think that's going to improve Fring's situation. Even if Fring can rationally recognize that Mike is correct here, the thought of admitting he has lost complete control is so distasteful to control freak Fring that when Mike suggests Nacho be allowed to actually join this conversation by phone, Fring can only manage this tight little stoic drug lord nod. He looks so small in the frame as he hides behind his henchman Tyrus, whose drawn weapon is ultimately another expression of desperation and weakness. Like I said, it's pathetic. The way that Giancarlo Esposito can infuse that pathos into Fring in this episode without ever breaking the character's ice-cold mask is a testament to the nuance the actor can bring to the role. I'll finish with Jimmy and Kim. Their storyline opens on a shot of Jimmy rehearsing a potential character for the next stage of Operation Humiliate Howard. Jimmy is in his cinematic element here. He's actor, screenwriter, and director all in one. Note how readily some of the lines in this exchange broaden from the specific to the general, as is often the case on this show. When Kim asks Jimmy who he's supposed to be...
Wait, who are you supposed to be again?
Yes, she's talking about the swindle, but also that's the perpetual question for Jimmy. Who is he supposed to be? Likewise, Jimmy's response to Kim's question...
Whatever. The backstory is just a placeholder. I'm going to polish the script once we cast.
It's practically a statement of philosophy. It's how he tries to live his life. The backstory, the past, can be rewritten to fit the story you want to create for your future. Of course, as Jimmy always discovers, rewriting your actual life is not so simple. As they refine their approach to this latest stage of the scam, it's Kim who makes the crucial casting decision as to who will star in their little law office drama, and she frames it to Jimmy like so.
You are going to hate this.
Once it's revealed that Kim is talking about the Kettlemans, it's easy to interpret Kim's remark in the sense that Jimmy's going to hate this because he can't stand the Kettlemans, especially Betsy, the feisty mastermind of this white-collar crime duo. And to me, that is in fact what Kim meant. But by the end of the episode, Jimmy hates the plan for an altogether different reason, not because he has disdain for Betsy Kettleman, but rather because he feels sympathy for her, an affinity between thieves. In a world of wolves and sheep, she's a wolf like him. Jimmy's conflicted attitude toward the Kettlemans highlights a fissure opening up between Kim and Jimmy, a fissure rooted in their different conceptions of liberty. I think you'll agree that liberty plays a pretty prominent role in this episode, starting when Jimmy pauses to admire that famous inflatable Lady Liberty on his way into Sweet Liberty Tax Services. And just what kind of sweet liberty does this place embody? Well, we're out here in the middle of the desert, far removed from prying eyes, where two disgraced embezzlers operate a shady tax refund scam. Their remoteness and low profile allows them to operate off the radar with freedom from the rules, freedom from the law, freedom to work an angle without interference. That's Jimmy's kind of liberty, right? In his America, the rules don't matter so much as being shrewder than the next guy. It's an America where the winners are the fast talkers, the corner cutters, the confidence men. It's a life free from the shackles of virtue and honesty. The Kettlemans may enjoy that sort of liberty right now, but the true liberation they desire is from their tainted past. In fact, that's what makes the Kettleman ploy so cruel. Jimmy offers them the thing they want most, which is to erase that checkered history. It's something Jimmy wants for himself, for that matter, so he knows how sweet the bait is. Jimmy plants this idea that they can indeed acquire that clean slate, and all they have to do is wave a magic wand called Discovery.
All of that gets on the record during Discovery. Yeah.
Cliff Main, that sturdy, reliable voice of reason, makes plain to the Kettlemans one of the show's enduring truths, which is that erasing the past is always harder than you imagine.
Overturning a conviction in a case like Craig's is extremely difficult.
Kim invites herself along on the last visit to Sweet Liberty Tax Services when her intuition tells her that Jimmy is inclined to dangle the carrot to the Kettlemans and might be unwilling to brandish the stick. Kim's preference is for the stick.
You're going to use the stick, right?
The stick, yeah, well, it's a big stick.
And again, this divide comes down to their different ideas of liberty. If Jimmy feels most free when he's cutting society's corners, Kim feels most free when she feels that, on the whole, she's fighting for justice. Like I said in the last breakdown, when she racks up these pro bono good acts, Kim always feels freed up to behave in ways that wouldn't stand up in court, as long as she can find herself a reason for her illicit behavior. And the reason in the case of the Kettlemans, as it usually is simply they deserved it. Kim certainly understands how cruel this bait and switch is, but hey, those Kettlemans had it coming. That's the underlying idea. So says the gospel in Kim's personal cathedral of justice. When Jimmy indicates he's going to buy off the Kettlemans, there's an implicit questioning of that gospel. Yeah, Jimmy makes these half-hearted remarks about the spoonful of sugar and whatnot as if it's a tactical decision, but he's avoiding a subtext, namely the idea that this wad of cash will make them square with the Kettlemans, that in fact they owe a debt to the Kettlemans for wasting their time and torturing them with impossible dreams of redemption. Jimmy doesn't say this out loud, but it hangs in the air, and unspoken though it may be, Kim does not care for that idea one bit. A cash payment to settle the score implies that she and Jimmy did something wrong. That threatens Kim's sense of freedom, which depends on her conviction that ultimately she's doing good, and if there are victims along the way, it's only the people who deserved it anyway. So Kim tags along with every intention of not merely threatening the stick, but wielding it, because by forcing the Kettlemans to admit their fraud and submit to her threats, Kim will ensure that they deserved it is the agreed-upon story for all parties involved. Thus, the gospel is preserved. Thus, Kim's self-image as the avatar of justice is preserved. And while Kim is certainly operating with zeal, it's not like she's way off base, is she? The Kettlemans are indeed serial embezzlers who are preying on their customers. Who would argue that they don't deserve it? Well, I can think of one person.
And we didn't deserve any of this.
Okay. Enough carrot.
And we didn't deserve any of this. It's the one lie that at long last Kim cannot stand. No more carrot after she hears we didn't deserve this, because for Kim, that is the ultimate blasphemy. We spend much of this scene waiting for that moment when the dam of Kim's righteous fury will break, because her contempt for the Kettlemans is evident from the moment of their arrival. After they get out of the car, we see her clenching her jaw, almost snarling, dressed in fiery red. Jimmy's wearing blue. He's making little jokes, gentle tone of voice, trying to keep a lid on things. She's agitated. He's quiet. Another variation on the theme. This shot here with Liberty cleaving the space between the two characters is another nudge to the idea that they're separated by divergent ideas of Liberty. Jimmy once again stops to admire the blow-up Lady Liberty, calls her a nice touch, because his idea of liberty is not so far removed from the Kettlemans. Kim's preferred sort of liberty is the Pledge of Allegiance kind, the kind that goes hand in hand with justice for all. Kim's allegiance to the law may be situational, but she maintains a firm allegiance to justice as she calculates it. That's why Kim's gaze instead settles on this sweet Liberty customer, another citizen whose life has been destroyed by the Kettleman crime syndicate. Kim is drinking in the sense of righteousness she gets from looking at this freshly swindled old lady, because it adds another varnish coat of justice to the stick she's about to wield. But let's not lose track of the fact that Kim is also feeling real sympathy here. We have no reason to doubt that, and we have ample reason to believe her compassion is genuine, not just from what we know of her character, but also more specifically because of her own impoverished past, to which she alludes in this episode.
You think you've lost everything? You have no idea.
And we also caught glimpses of Kim's past last season.
Kimmy, it was one beer.
Doesn't smell like one beer.
We're given enough evidence to understand that Kim relates to the Kettleman's victims on the basis of personal experience. Her more cynical self-interest in casting the Kettlemans as villains coexists with a real, selfless compassion for their victims. The reality is that both motivations, both sympathy and self-interest, are fueling Kim's fire in this scene. It's the combination of the both of them that makes her such a potent force. Of course, Jimmy's perspective is informed by personal experience, too. As Kim enjoys an almost post-coital satisfaction after putting the Kettlemans in their place, she calls Jimmy out for handing over the carrot, despite Kim's highly effective stick session.
You gave him the money, didn't you?
All Jimmy does to explain himself is mumble, wolves and sheep.
Wolves and sheep.
Huh?
Nothing.
This refers to the seminal flashback all the way back in Season 2 when a scammer uses a sob story to con young Jimmy's shopkeeper dad out of $10. Afterward, the con artist tells Jimmy,
"There are wolves and sheep in this world, kid. Figure out which one you're gonna be."
In short order, Jimmy decides he's a wolf. "Who are you supposed to be?" Kim asks Jimmy at the beginning of the episode. "I'm supposed to be a wolf," seems to be the idea Jimmy returns to by the end of the episode. Implicit in the wolves and sheep duality is the idea that one is a predator and the other is prey. When Jimmy recalls that duality here in this final scene, he's troubled by the fact that Kim just preyed on wolves. He doesn't feel right about it. She's upset the natural order of things. Going after Cliff and Howard is one thing. They're buttoned up, respected, rule followers. Those guys are sheep through and through. The Kettlemans are a different story. They may be obnoxious, but to Jimmy, they're still fellow wolves who were already clinging to the lowest rungs of society's ladder before Kim and Jimmy came back along to use them as pawns and then discard them again. Jimmy feels a certain kinship with them, and more ominously, if Kim considers wolves fair game in her quest to, as the arrow sign pointing at her head puts it, get money now, that might leave Jimmy, who's a wolf himself, feeling more vulnerable than he did before. Oh, and then this black car follows them down the road, but I'm sure that's going to be fine. That does it for Carrot and Stick. As always, if you had a good time, and if you made it this far, you probably did, you can say thanks by subscribing to the channel. Hey, I really enjoyed your comments on the last breakdown. It's so nice to be back with this community again and learning from your insights. I love you guys. I gotta go. It is hot as blazes in the Basement Breakdown studio today. I'm going to turn the AC on, maybe wrap a wet bandana around my neck. Until next time, Namaste 3. So long, guys.